All right, everybody, good morning, and welcome to the follow-up lecture to There Will Come Soft Rains. This time we'll be looking at, I guess the full title is October 2026, The Million Year Picnic. I think usually just The Million Year Picnic is what it's referred to. This is Ray Bradbury. You know, this is part of the Martian Chronicles, which I think is an ongoing saga, something that was released in periodicals, if I'm not mistaken. But of course, we're just focused on a couple stories from it. Unless I read more of those, I can't see any follow-up lectures coming after this one. But this is a great story. I like it because it's quite different. We actually follow some characters in this story, whereas the first one, There Will Come Soft Rains, really we just follow the demise of that home, and there's some kind of other characters involved. But this, we truly have some characters that we're with from beginning to end. So let's get right into it. I think the first thing to note, I remember as I was teaching this with my students just this last year, is the wonderful relationship I feel that the dad and the mom have. They seem to really be locked on the same page. There's some wonderful imagery of how the mother looks into the father's eyes about what's coming up ahead as they go down the boat on the canal, and at the same time seeing what's going on with his emotions as well. So we know they're intricately linked, and they seem to have the same objective in mind. And of course, that objective is the father getting to this point where he burns everything from the past, right, in a great fire. And he's been preparing for this. He's been trying to kind of work up his will to be able to follow through with this task. And this is, you know, is when I do these lectures, I always kind of cover the, the full thing, so that we can speak in totality about the piece. So they're very much linked up. The language is, but they weren't mom's words. Timothy knew that. They were dad's words, and mom used them for him somehow. So she is helping to accommodate the father on his journey here, and they seem to be, there's some kind of insider information between them. They're not really sharing with the kids. The kids will be fixated on the game of kind of exploration, and we'll talk about that. But the mom and dad have other things in mind. Just think about the burning of the documents and such, and what they're preparing for here. Almost like a ceremony or a ritual. All right, so moving forward, it's very clear to us through imagery that the father is nervous for this journey, right? That they say it's a fishing trip, but again, after reading the piece, we know that he has something a bit more impactful in mind. So a couple things that stand out here. Fishing trip. The way I'm looking at this, and I might be off on it, but is fish as in the constellation Pisces, right? We're here on a fishing trip. We linked that to the constellation of Pisces, the era of Pisces, which is also the era of Christ. So I think a lot of this story is a cleansing. It's almost like a forgiveness, right? It's a rebirth of humanity. Right, and that's going to take place on this fishing trip because it's linking us to a different idea of ourselves found in the ways of Jesus, right? That's why we get this fishing trip early on. You see the Christian fish everywhere, especially driving around. People choose to put this on the back of their cars. You might be asking, why is there fish always associated with this? Again, it's the great eras, epics that we encounter throughout time, and now we are in the age of Pisces in the next one. These are like 3,000 years, I believe, kind of time periods. The next one will be Aquarius, that wonderful disco song. the age of Aquarius or whatever that is. Right now we're in the era of Pisces. This is the era of Christ. So that's my personal interpretation. I'm picking up on some biblical stuff. I think it's validated because we look at there will come soft rains. We had the references to Baal, which is an opposing civilization, represents and opposing the Babylonian civilization, which opposes the Hebrews, opposes the teachings of God, at least from that biblical standpoint. I think you get a lot of biblical references in this text as well. Bradbury definitely seems to be plugging them in, at least in my personal opinion. All right, Timothy, the name itself translates to honoring God. So our main character, Timothy, the youngest son, translates right away to honoring God. One last key piece of diction I want to point out in the beginning of the story is it said, Dad pushed a stud, right? And that's obviously a reference to something that holds the boat in place, right? So as he's moving the boat into the water, but I think it's also a choice piece of diction. Remember what a stud is. And I love to explain it with my students. We talk about stud muffin, right? And the ways we use that word in colloquial ways, right? But what it also is quite literally is a horse that simply impregnates a bunch of other female horses. Giraffes, you go to the Santa Barbara Zoo, their giraffe there is Michael. He's constantly basically just breeding, right? So it speaks to this idea of procreation. And don't forget that when you go back to those old biblical texts, the Old Testament, right, maybe others from other religions, it really kind of speaks to that level of procreation, right? Coming onto land, having it for yourself. It speaks to those dilemmas and experiences of people, right? It's kind of interwoven into it. So I think it's a choice word here, this idea of coming to a place, claiming it to be ours, and now we are going to settle, and we are going to exist here ongoing. A very key theme that I think, again, check YouTube. Not many people are even talking about this story, but nobody's really latching on to these key motifs early on here, right? Some of these words that are just passing by. And right away, we get, you go from stud, impregnation, right? Breeding, procreating, and we get our family here, right? We are covering a family, right? That which leads to a family. The story thematically also deals with this idea of a family unit. I think that's a big theme as well. And we'll talk about that more later. We look at the father's face, some key phrasing here. It was made of strong light and maybe a sort of relief. It made the deep wrinkles laugh instead of worry or cry. And early on, your first reading in the story, you're always asking, if you're reading carefully enough, relief from what? Or what has he been through that is so deeply troubling? Well, we know. Living on earth, being a politician, knowing the truth about things more than your average citizen, but not being able to kind of contain it, right? And just kind of keep it to yourself and manage it that way. Being discouraged by information or shocked or angered by what's happening in the world, right? We know the kind of person that he is. But away from it all, there's now this relief. Now there is a line here, I'll quickly address it. It says, drowsing in a hot silence of summer made on Mars by a Martian weatherman. Made in Mars by a Martian weatherman seemed, I haven't read all of these stories, but I think they actually do meet Martians at some point in time. There's already a race of people, we see the cities here, existing on Mars, and so we'll meet them later. We don't do it in this story, or maybe we do in an ironic way as they stare into the water and they see their reflections, and the father says, "There's your Martians." But we don't actually meet them, but I'm pretty sure, because I've seen some of the TV adaptations of these stories, and you actually see the Martians at some point. So if they're true to this short story series, then we'll probably see Martians later on after this the story goes on, and the families. It follows different people on Mars, as far as I understand, all having different experiences. Well, anyways, it sounds like they can control the weather on Mars, and they have the technology to do so. Do we have the technology to control weather? I think in some ways we do, and you can start to scour the internet and see what you find, but not on a level where we can kind of make it exactly the way we need it. The whole atmosphere, everything that we would need to control. All right. So Timothy is the oldest son, which means he will have the most concern about the world, especially the world that he comes from contextually, which has been devastated by war, right? There will come soft rains, gives us the end of kind of civilization, right? And what war has brought to the world. Here we've escaped it, right? We've kind of flown away from it. We were lucky to do so. But it's still troubling. But it's very, it's still very troubling to Timothy to think about it. The other brothers aren't thinking about it as much, but Timothy's definitely thinking about it. All right, so there's an interesting, kind of strange simile here, and I'll read it out. The war was as removed and far off as two flies battling to the death in the arc of a great high and silent cathedral, and just as senseless. I remember when we covered this in class, I got out the whiteboard real quick online, because this was Zooming, we were Zooming, and I drew out this image, because it's definitely a lot of imagery here, right? And it's just these two flies battling it out in this kind of giant, silent cathedral, and it just seems senseless. And I think the quick interpretation of that is countries going to war and fighting and being aggressive toward one another, just like those flies. And if you've ever seen two flies fight, they really do kind of zap at each other and then fly back away and pew, you know what I mean? It's like jousting on fly level. But it's like, that's the microcosm. The macrocosm will be, through this simile, human beings fighting in a world that is governed by something like a silent cathedral, which we could say religious principles, right, or peace, a sense of rest in contrast to this senseless activity, these flies buzzing at each other. So I think that's the idea. In a world that is more governed by the ideas of goodness and peace, here we have these flies senselessly fighting. And that's a commentary on the world we come from. Do you agree with that? The idea behind this simile, that's how you would classify countries. Buzzing and hurting each other and having this conflict in a world that should be governed by greater principles, right? Of peace, togetherness, right? At least non-aggressiveness. All right, let's look at the father. I think the father gets a lot of good imagery here. It's descriptive, and it brings him to a level of an animal. What's mentioned here is an immense hawk nose. We have a lot of hawks around here. I think we get a lot of what's called red-tailed hawks, and it's a predator, right? They are constantly circling, waiting at all times of the day, right? There's breakfast, there's lunch, there's dinner. And they are the predators, right? And that's what the father is. A lot of the times, I guess it can be in science fiction, our protagonist, and it is Tim. I think Tim's the hero of this story, the oldest son, but the father is right along there. He's a big character, but notice that he is the predator, but he's had to reevaluate. He's been the politician, and kind of in accordance with countries that are aggressive on a world stage, right? He was a U.S. politician. And so we have this very strong and predator-like characterization through the way he looks. Let's look at some other things. Sunburnt, you could see that on a religious, ethical, moral line, right? Like being burned from something hot, maybe sin, right? Coming from the world that he does, that's led to this utter destruction. Hot blue eyes. Blue is an interesting, blue definitely brings you to a certain type of person, Aryan, right, genetically speaking, right, in terms of the peoples that we have from around the world. So that's an interesting one for Bradbury to use. And the last one I want to bring it to, a couple things I'd like to bring attention to. Long, thick, columnar legs, very powerful. Legs like columns, but I want you to also think of columns and what they represent in terms of Greek and Roman association, right? When we see columns, especially architecturally, we see columns, we know we're in something important, something that stands for something, right? That has a permanent place, and maybe even beyond that within our society. So like columns, bringing us to kind of these establishment of who we are as a civilization, right? And notice loose riding breeches, which brings us to horses. I think this story largely is about colonization, that major theme, right, of the kind of more advanced Western world taking over South America, taking over Africa, right, Western European world. And let's not forget, my 11th graders always have to learn this when we learn about U.S. history, right, and early, like the beginning days of it. We also know that the horse was a major tool used by the Spaniards and others to easily conquer the indigenous populations of South America and North America as well, but definitely South America, right, when that was taking place. So I think that's going to be a reference to strong predator types who overrun others, right? Just like the hawk in the sky I mentioned a moment ago. Here we're talking about men, right? Conquistadors, and all of these people taking over regions of the world and subduing and killing other populations. And the dad has all of that description, but maybe there's a rebirth taking place. Remember, we're on a fishing trip, right? The ways of the important religious figure of Christ, right? And the Pisces, right? Tying us to that constellation, the age of Christ. The father says, I was looking for earthian logic, common sense, good government, peace, and responsibility. He's looking for those things in the sky, which is to say, sadly, none of those things exist on earth. Social commentary. This story written perhaps in the 60s. I know the last one was. So, you know, I'll let you make up your mind for the year 2021. Are we lacking what could be called earthian logic? Are we lacking common sense these days, in your opinion? Or do we have it? Are we lacking good government? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Are we lacking peace? Well, obviously. World peace, I don't know when that will come. There always seems to be something going on between different countries. And responsibility, a sense of responsibility. Do we still have that as people, right? The dad is saying it's not there, all right? And then he redirects. I love this. He redirects, and this ends the first scene of this story. He says, see the fish, said Dad? You know, I was looking up there for all those things. Tim, I don't see it. He looks down at the water and says, look at those fish. And again, fish, the age of Pisces. There's something different that can be our guide here. We move into the next section, right? Now, this one throws me off a little bit because I largely see the water and the fish as, again, the age of Pisces and Christ, and tying us to those characteristics, just like it would other great figures in religious history, Muhammad, right? The Buddha, right? All of these figures, right? Because a lot of times they will overlap, but not overlap in others. This one throws me off because I largely see the water as something redemptive, right? Just so I can speak at full here. Going to change the dad. We already know the dad's a man in need of change, just based on physical description. We can see that. He says he's looking at the fish and he sees one kind of swallow up some food particles. And he says, quote, just like war. War swims along, sees food, contracts. A moment later, Earth is gone. So he sees that as, I think, my wave, and I've thought about this one for a while. I think he's just saying that as people, as organisms that come from Earth, we just take over. It's our instinct to take over. Right? I will take this water bottle, especially if there's like 5 other people and there's not a lot of water. I might take it. I might run. I'm going to take over this land over here, take it for my own, right? Maybe it's one property, maybe it's a whole big group of properties, right? Maybe it's a country, maybe it's a region of the world, all right? So you can see how it's just that idea of taking by instinct, by nature, what's in front of you. And I think this is where we get into those religious themes, which is religion is supposed to civilize that organism that just seeks to take and take and take and not think about others or the consequences, right, of what they're doing. And something's got to wedge itself in, because if you just leave it up to instinct, it's going to happen every time. It's just going to go keep swimming along and taking and taking and taking, all right? But maybe something can be the wedge in there and get you to think differently. And I think that's where, for a lot of people, religion's through all over the world, because it's largely philosophy and psychology, right? So it's complex, kind of comes in. But that's what he sees happening in the water, all right? One of the sons' names is William, short for will, like the will to do something, right? So keep that one in the back of your mind. I don't think the 2 brothers' names are all that helpful. I think some of the other names are definitely more helpful. Even Tim's name, which was honoring God, I think that's the kind of trip he's on. And he's on the same wavelength as his parents, not the other brothers, but he is. So he's having a more adult perspective on things, understanding what they're doing, the points they're making. Seeing it beyond just the shock value, right, of burning things or rockets blowing up. Okay, moving forward. This is cool. Speaking of war, I think what you're going to find in William and Robert, the two younger brothers, is this kind of warlike activity, right? Here it says the other boys were already engaged making shelves like this of their small hands and peering under them toward the 7-foot stone banks of the canal. And it feels very military-like to go scout something, see what's ahead, make plans, advance, right? So it speaks to that type of activity. They're very curious about the Martians as we move forward. Now, this is, I think, some important description of the mother's internal feelings, right? Big paragraph. Bradbury doesn't really hit us all too much with just big paragraphs because there's a lot of dialogue and such. So this is a big one. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but notice it at one point in the middle of this paragraph starts with mother was slender and soft. The mother gets a very positive, to keep it general, a very positive description here. Soft, gentle. Notice, what is that in deep contrast to the aggression of war? Men destroying men, right, and entire countries, right, entire regions of the globe. So here we get a soft side. And some of us might think that's based on sex and gender, right, that women have a tendency to be softer. Of course, they are mothers, right? There's a lot going on there that a man cannot speak to in terms of raising children, right? Men have their experiences as well. But this is, this is the gentle mother. And midway through this big paragraph, we get the simile like fish, some bright, some dark, some fast, quick, some slow and easy, and sometimes, like when she looked up where earth was, being nothing but color and nothing else. She sat in the boat's prow, one hand resting on the side lip, the other on the lap of her dark blue breeches, and a line of sunburnt soft neck showing where her blouse opened like a white flower. Little sunburn here. Remember we were talking about sin, being scorched. Little bit of sunburn here. Why wouldn't there be? She's been living on earth, right? She's seen things. Her husband's a politician. Maybe she's just as complicit in the world destroying itself as anybody else is, right? Living there, being a part of this. So that could be it, but it's opening like a white flower, which could be innocence and purity, rebirth, right? Like a flower. So a lot going on metaphorically in this paragraph. And again, like fish, taking us to the age of Pisces, era of Christ. And I think, like it says, some bright, some dark, that's people. That's not only people. Some people are going through bright times, some people are going through dark times. That's not only different people, that's different parts of your life. Sometimes I am that person, sometimes I'm not, and I'm living in brightness, right? Things are good. But the human experience, of course, here on earth that we all share in is that it's a mixed bag here, but it's all within the era of Pisces, the era of Christ, which means there's a certain perspective on this, right? Maybe it's time to start over. I think that rebirth, rejuvenation, right, remediation, you name it, right? All of that type of just starting over. That theme is very powerful in the story. And here's that part I was talking about in the beginning of the lecture. I'm just going to paraphrase. She essentially looks into, they're going down the river, and he's paddling, right? And she can't see what's behind her. They're going this way, right? They're going this way, and she's faced this way. So she looks into her husband's eyes, and not only does she see what's up ahead, but I'll just mention this. She sees his determined firmness to press ahead. Never forget, as you read or reread this story, that the dad knows what he's going to do. This is on his mind. It is his major internal conflict. Is this going to be a permanent place for us? The rocket blows up, no getting back, right? That happens early in the text. and now it's time to now dispose of all these documents that represent what Earth thought it was, and I think that's what we're going to be moving into in just a moment. Further along, we start to get some diction, some imagery of bone-like things like marrow. Here early on it says marrow jolting explosions, and making us think about the bones inside of our body. The skull, right? We get references to the skull. My best guess is to remind us of what we are, human, despite our exaggerated sense of how great we are in the world, the technology we create, the countries we build, the bridges that we build that will never fall, however you want to, however you want to put it. We are human beings. We die. We are made of the stuff of the earth, of this substance, and we will return to it, right? Which is humbling, which is reminding us that our time is definitely limited. That's my guess, is to always remind us of our finite nature, right? Now, what the dad likes to get going here early on is just describing everything to his two youngest sons, Timothy included, but I think he knows Timothy is reading into things differently. But the two young boys, he acts like everything's just a giant game. And he tells, essentially, I guess you could say, requires Tim to play along with the boys as well. Tim going to have a major influence on his two younger brothers. So act like everything is a game. That rocket blew up. The kids are like, what? And he's like, yeah, it's a game, ha, right? And Timothy's one of the main people complicit with this. He's helping to keep this idea that this is all just a game going. I think that says something else about war and our early kind of attitudes toward it. A lot of the time when we, I'm no exception, pretend war, you have, squirt guns, this, that, and the next, little soldier men that move around, the video games that we play. It's essentially an endless list. But remember, we classify those as games, right? What is Call of Duty? A game. And yet, look at what shortly comes after that, which is real, a context of real military engagement throughout the world. And so it's really just an easy transition for a lot of young men and young women, right? I think you can say nowadays, because more girls are playing these games, into that idea that military is just a fixed part of our society, right? It's always there, and it's to be supported, it's to be upholded. So to sum up, the game is so important. I think it's that transition into the real military engagement that impacts and kind of organizes, in a sense, the world and what we have, right? Now here, it's revealed through dialogue that there's another family on the that's going to be coming. It is Edward, the Edwards family. The name Edward translates to guardian, protector, and fame. I don't think. And check out this diction, right? I'll just actually read the text. He just sat there, and the children were caught in the center of his awe and defeat and resignation and acceptance. And I think this describes his changing attitudes toward the end of the world, humanity destroying itself and leading to this situation where you either flee or face, face the end. Let's check these out. Awe. I can't believe we can do this. I can't believe we can destroy the entire world. What is it, 2,000-3,000 times over? Or check the stats on this. With the nuclear power, right? It's amazing. That's the awe. I can't believe it happened. Did you look at that city blown out, right? I can't believe it happened. What comes next? It's like the 4 stages of dealing with the fact that we've killed ourselves. Defeat, right? It's over. Then resignation. Like, what can you do to fix it? You have to accept it, which is the final state. You accept. Acceptance. Acceptance that we have, not only that we've done this to ourselves, but we are the type of people who have led this certain kind of lives, right? And our countries have conducted themselves, and the governments especially, in certain ways that has led to the utter destruction of humanity on earth. And we accept it. Right? Let's look at the dad. Right after we get some of that key diction, the father is talking to his sons quietly and gently, right? And it even says quickly here that that's a contrast than how he usually treats his sons, right? Which is kind of distant, brisk. The more a traditional father, go back into the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, go way back to like the Spartan fathers, who knows, right? There was supposed to be this distance, right? Because of the male being men, right? There has to be this distance. But notice, and who would be the gentle figure? Who would be the soft figure? It would be the mom's role. But here, you better take a big note. The dad is that person, right? He is changed, right? We've been talking about redemption this whole time. All right. Now comes this part of the story where, you know, they just come to go down the canal, and there's all these different cities. Some are kind of settlements that have been put up by human beings. Some are Martians, right? We know that ends up being a very real race that they discover. I haven't read any of that literature yet, but that's where it's all headed, I believe. So we see all these different cities, and the dad says, playing the game, of course, playing the game. The dad says, pick the one you like the best, that you want to stake your claim on, that you want to, you know, claim to be yours. And it speaks to the idea of just kind of conquest and colonization and taking what you think you like, you know, just for that reason alone. I think that's what it speaks to here, right? And a lot of geez, goshes, and look at that. The family's in awe as to what they're seeing here, right? The dad finally finds one city, and he says, this is the one that we're going to be staying on, right? This is, or staying at. This is one of the sons inquires, when are we getting back on that rocket? And when are we going back to Minnesota? All right. Minnesota, I believe, is a word that translates to body of water, right? Minnesota. So it's getting back to the Native American there, right? But even that speaks to this idea of kind of water and renewal, right? Rejuvenation, right? Minnesota, when can we go back? When can we go back to a place on earth that represents rejuvenation? And the dad says, listen to the radio. There's nothing left on earth. So that rejuvenation on earth it's not an option. It's gone. We have to move on. That's where we're headed here, right? This is our new home, Mars. He says to Mike translates to the kind of a phrase that is associated with the Archangel Michael, which is, whose power is greater than God? It's a rhetorical question. It means no one. So the names are quite religious, obviously, quite biblical. I'll leave it up to you how you apply those. We recognize that Tim doesn't like playing the game. He's way more sensitive than that, right? And he's thinking about what's happening on earth, the fact that it is now a lost cause, and he can't help but weep. He can't help but think of how painful it is, right? We've destroyed ourselves. It says he's playing the game of finding these new settlements with his two brothers. He's doing it well. He should be commended. But it says he could go off by himself and cry for 10 minutes. If he could, right? He's sensitive to all of this, right? So that's ironic. Tim is being told to kind of act a way that he doesn't really want to, based on the context at hand. As they get off and run into this city with a fountain, notice the water. It's got to have that source of water. That's a motif throughout the entire text, and I think it speaks to redemption, right? The dad says, be careful of your sister, and it's strange, it's awkward. And if you don't stop to think about how awkward it is, it passes you by. But what's he doing? He's calling the city that they're about to go into their new sister, right? Not sure, you know, you see it validated immediately in the next sentence. They hurried into the great pink stone city, pink as in sister, right? Feminine, right? Whispering, soft, gentle. Those particular characteristics look no further than the mother, but also look no further than the father too in this story, as somebody who is a changed person. So one thing we find out is that there are 4 daughters coming to Mars, right? Just like Timothy and his brothers, we have 3 boys here, have arrived shortly after. Albert Edwards, that's the full name, he and his family are set to arrive as well. There are 4 daughters. The mother says, I can see that'll cause trouble later. And she does, not a lot is really, elaborated on or any kind of detail given, but basically she's just saying what's obvious. The numbers don't match up, so there's going to be 1 extra daughter. Now, that means that there might be a competition. It might lead to one of the daughters being by their own, being on their own. If you're really trying to follow this through, we do have a pink stone city that was just referenced as their sister by the father, so maybe there is another entity here that lonely daughter can link up with. It's strange, but because it's really not, nothing in this short story really says more to this, but it is interesting, the ideas of kind of competition and the idea of exclusion and how we're all vying for, a mate or an individual here. It rekindles that theme of competition, aggression, right? And the mother is simply stating the obvious that might lead to some problems later on. This is what follows is Michael, one of the younger brothers, making a face like an ancient Martian stone image and saying, girls, girls, right? Kind of a strange simile to describe the boy, as he uses the word in it, probably with a tone that reflects, not understanding, or, that girls are one in their own and that it's, they have their own characteristics, right? And maybe even to be a bit condescending as well, girls, right? So I think that's going to definitely get us thinking about the theme of men versus women, let's say gender characteristics, right? What we expect of different, the 2 genders here, right? We know that all of that is much more complex in the year 2021. Bradbury, of course, is writing in the 1960s. When we get back into, with biblical references here, ancient times, right? The times of the Canaanites and other groups, right? Other civilizations, it does start to break into the divide between men and women, right? The roles that these 2 groups of individuals play within society. So I think those themes are important to this story, right? We quickly find out that the father was always saving this one rocket so that he could get away from Earth. He had grown disenchanted with Earth, it seems, fairly early on. He was a politician, which means maybe the curtain for him was already, half pulled up, and he could see the real inner workings of our society, how it's connected on a global context. He understood the problems on a level, and maybe the corruption, maybe the aggression that these competing governments in the world have on a level that your average individual didn't. So he's kind of, I don't want to use the term, but woken up, right? Woken up to some of the criticism, some of the problems with a society like this. And he's always wanted to hold on to this rocket, which is simply, really a metaphor for rebirth, the ability to get away and start again. And that's really what he's going to capitalize on, moving into the last couple pages here. Now, one thing I found interesting is the dad says, so we can't go back, ever. And so if any of those evil men ever come to Mars, they won't know we're here, because we've essentially disposed of our trail, blew up our rocket. They'll think we're dead, that we don't exist, if they ever come here, right? Maybe they would try and come and chase this guy down, being an ex-politician, right? That could be it. Bradbury, I've noticed in both stories, There Will Come Soft Rains and this kind of companion story, Million Year Picnic, he does not use the word evil much at all. 2 times in both stories. The first was evil Baal. We've talked about the Baal reference, fertility god of Babylon. They had other gods as well. I think even other bigger gods as well. I don't think the fertility god was even the most renowned. We had evil Baal. Here we have evil men, which is government men. So we've taken that reference of ancient times, ancient civilizations, and now we've really just kind of used it on more modern day politicians. This specifically of the U.S. context. I think this would be the government of the United States, but really it speaks to governments throughout the world too, right? Okay, very good. This is a great kind of titles that we get here in this very short paragraph, because, and it's important because this is really thematically what drives us, right, as human beings. King of the Hill. Used to be a nice cartoon show. I watched it maybe a little bit. Top of the heap. Ruler of all they surveyed. Unimpeachable monarchs and presidents. The family on this fishing trip, which I think still kind of represents a redemption here, does represent colonialists, imperialist people who come and now take over a new territory. I think in the greater saga of this story, ironically, of course, they run into actual Martians here, right? So they're not alone. But you see what they carry with them. And this is what comes from Earth. This tendency to be king of the hill. I always ask that of my students, and I would say a small percentage of students have actually played king of the hill. We used to play it a fair amount when I was a kid. If there was a big hill and there was absolutely nothing else to do, everybody would scatter up it and just try to stay on the top for as long as possible. And that was the whole thing. I am on top. I am the strongest. I can defend this the most. Top of the heap, same thing. I like this next one, ruler of all they surveyed. Remember we talked about the boys building their hands like shelves, right? Watching, surveying, seeing what could be ours for the taking. Hence, colonialist aspirations, the need to expand outward. Some of these processes which are glorified for sure within certain teaching, certain learning, certain textbooks, certain books in the world as well. So some of the stuff is highly encouraged. Maybe that's part of the problem. Unimpeachable monarchs and presidents. We're talking about kings, queens, presidents. How different are kings and queens from presidents or prime ministers these days? And that whole kind of similar group there. I'll let you be the judge of that. All right. Now the father starts to burn a set of documents, right? And he's got specific things that he's burning here, that he's brought from Earth, which really represent the greatness of Earth. I don't think the perfection of Earth, but I think the ambition of human beings working within the confines of an earthian existence. But let's see what happens, right? As we're burning up the books and the pages, I'll just read, Timothy saw the little letters leap like frightened animals when the flames touched and engulfed them. I think the simile here is to remind us that we are animals. No matter what mathematical equations we may construct that help to govern our living, our awareness of our lives, no matter what scientific endeavors we, through our own skill and insight and curiosity, our minds can create, right? All of this, notice, because let me get ahead here. I think this is helpful to jump to the next paragraph. Let's see the things he's burning up. Let's check it out. Government bonds, which represents I would say the essential security of a particular nation or government, right? The fact that it is fortified through economic kind of means. Right, government bonds. This is what keeps a country strong. I'm not a huge financial guy. I don't know too much about everything, but I do know that during World War I, World War II, our country, other countries probably too, that were engaged in this world conflict, we were encouraging people to buy war bonds and other bonds, right, for the country to help fund the country, right, in the short, middle, and long term, right? So here we have this whole kind of record of government bonds. And what are we doing? We should be storing that and keeping it safe, providing a digital record of that, right? No, we are burning it. What else are we burning? A business graph from 1999, right? Which when the story is written is definitely the future. We look back on 1999 now and we think of the Prince song, right? Always. But notice let me get serious. What we're burning here is business aspirations of human beings. I think one of the reasons human beings probably hold ourselves in such high esteem, especially when we compare ourselves to one another, is this whole world of business and what we can do through business, what we can build, how we can change our lives and other people's lives through business. And here's a graph that represents that information. But what are we doing with it? What's the Father now doing? Essentially purging this new Martian environment that he has with his family and a family and their daughters coming as well, purging this new environment of any influence of the old, right? Let's see what else. Religious prejudice, which doesn't sound like a good thing no matter how you slice it, right? Prejudice based on different religions within the world. Do we have religious prejudice within our country? Sure. Do other countries throughout the world? Maybe even more so, right? Because other countries throughout the world can be theocracies, which is government and religion tightly wound in providing, a kind of functioning society in people's lives. So, but we know people butt heads all the time and have throughout history. I'm always reminded of one of the first reports I did as a child, as a young teenager, was on not just the Crusades, but the children's crusades. Once they ran out of adults to fight in that war, they started sending children. So there you go. So we are just talking about, stuff that really has an impact on the world here. What else? An essay, The Science of Logistics. Some people, this is, a very debatable issue. Some people think science will, and technology, right, will be what saves us on this planet, what provides the next big steps for us in many different endeavors, maybe feeding the hungry, maybe getting us to Mars, maybe providing faster faster travel through city, whatever it's going to be, right? But at the same time, we have to remember the commentary of the story. This is what leads to the inflation of the ego of man and woman. What we can do through our own means, our own brains. And in a way, you go back to the Tower of Babylon, right? Babylonian society. This idea that man and woman from a particular advanced civilization would want to rise up and power the infinite knowledge of one true entity, right? That some people believe in, some people don't, right? God, right? Especially from the Judeo-Christian and Islamic sense, that monotheistic God, right? Challenging that. And then what happens to the Tower of Babylon? Look it up. It gets rent in half or whatever, in pieces by a thunderbolt, right? And then it's also a clever way of describing why people speak different languages and stuff, right? But it's also to portray a negative image from a biblical standpoint, from a Hebrew standpoint of Babylon, right? And the idea of an advanced society, maybe getting too big for its own good or rivaling the majesty and the infinite knowledge of a one true God, right? Don't forget, we just had that word evil just a moment ago. Problems of the Pan-American unity, I think that's North and South America coming together, right? Which there's been all kinds of involvement and conflict there. You can do your own research over time. Last couple things here, the stock report for July 3rd. So everything to do with the stock market, which obviously is involves corporations, military-industrial companies, military-industrial complex companies. It speaks to a certain part of our society. The last one on the list is the War Digest, before we get an ellipses here and it trails on, which means there's more that he's burning. We're not told anything more specific beyond this, but he's still going, right? There could be more. the War Digest, which really just, I guess, speaks to conflicts, maybe serious conversations about engagement, maybe not necessarily trying to resolve issues, but at least speaking to how these engagements have gone, and some critical analysis of that. But digesting, right, the ongoing saga of war throughout the centuries, right? Okay. He says here, I'm burning a way of life, and we just covered all of what that was. Remember, all these pages are burning up, and they're burning up, it says, like animals, right? And without that vast knowledge that humanity has really built over time from one civilization to the next, and here we are, we keep on progressing and putting every foot forward. Let's not get too far. Let's not forget who we are, at least from that standpoint of that kind of one true entity. Let's not overstep our bounds, right? Because in the end, from that standpoint, we are animals, right? We are animals. We are instinctual, competitive, right? Cruel. I mean, you know, look at the animals that we live with. Look at the animals that we see at the zoo in their natural environments. How nice are these animals and these creatures? There are predators. There are prey. The Father, I think, really helps the reader. I think he really helps all of us by really putting his sentiments in very clear words. And so I'll read a little bit. Science ran too far ahead of us too quickly. I always stop my students as we read. Do you agree or disagree with that currently in the year 2021? Do you think science, I guess we could throw in technology, right? That comes with that. Is it getting too far ahead of us too quickly? Or do you think it's only benefiting us and we're keeping up? In fact, we should be maybe even accelerating in some ways. So I like to just pause and point out the social commentary here that the Father is expressing, right? The sentiment here, the critical sentiment. You might agree, you might disagree. I'll keep on going. People got lost in a mechanical wilderness, you know, with our phones, our computers, forms of entertainment that fully immerse us in a world that is not, you know, that is not, I guess you could say, traditional, right? It's amazing, somebody like myself, I'm 40 currently, and it's crazy to think how different things were when I was 15, 16, 17 compared to how things are now when, you know, really just plugged in all the time, it feels like, especially when you're working or doing schoolwork and stuff like that. You find yourself really, you know, using technology way more in your life than you ever did before. Are we getting lost in these things? Especially young people who are digital natives, who have grown up with, you know, from the day they were born, all of this has existed. Are they getting lost in a mechanical wilderness, as the simile goes? Moving forward, like children making over pretty things, gadgets, helicopters, rockets, it really has to do with our feelings and our feelings of encouragement, our feelings of positivity as we engage with technology and machinery, right? Maybe it's so alluring that it's hard to have a balanced perspective on how beneficial it is to us. Moving forward, lastly, emphasizing machines, how cool everything is, how powerful it is, how many lenses it's got, what the zoom is like, how fast the processor is, how many cylinders it's got, etc., 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 emphasizing machines instead of how to run the machines. 6 cylinders, yeah, but now you got a lot of force and speed, and you're going to have to be careful, right? Know how to run the machines. Oh yeah, you're going to have machines of killing, but are you going to kill a lot now? And speaking of governments, right, and war and military. Yeah, you have those really advanced weapons, but, you know, now the question is, what do you do with them, right? Do you use them in a responsible way, or do you just kind of, you know, start maybe being more assertive, aggressive with other countries? So it speaks to all different walks of life experiences, right? But the idea that we're obsessed with these machines in our lives, but not the way to handle them, which takes a certain ethical and moral code, I think, right, in many different ways. He says that society back on Earth, what we've been, essentially kind of outlining here, strangled itself with its own hands. So kind of a self-suicide here. What we find here is the ashes. We're left with the ashes of really symbolically all that defines Earth and what has led to its destruction. All the laws and beliefs of Earth were burnt into small hot ashes, which soon would be carried off in a wind and kind of forgotten. It reminds me of the same sentiment from the last story, There Will Come Soft Rains, when the animals in the poem shared There Will Come Soft Rains by Teasdale, the animals won't care. Nobody will mind if humans are gone. Look at the behavior, all right? Nobody will mind. Peace can come back. Man is expression of beast on a level that has led to self-annihilation. Let the regular animals kind of come back and have the world here, right? To speak to that theme of rejuvenation here, starting over, we get a black butterfly. Butterfly being the kind of metamorphosis, right? The future wives are coming soon, and now they were girls a moment ago, now they're future wives. So quickly, narratively, a feeling has been given to us, right? That these will be wives. We are here to resettle. Now, I get confused a little bit when I start thinking about this point. I think there's some critical point. There's the critical point that this nuclear family unit, mom, dad, kids, leads to a situation where I might, as a father and my whole family, have to get aggressive and take what is ours. In fact, I'll ask you, no matter what your age is, do you feel like that? That it's just a freaking competition? And some of you might already have families. I have a couple boys, and so you might already be feeling that way, right? So I think, here we are, we're about to link up these young people over time, and they're going to have babies, and we're going to start all over again. But is it going to be this kind of competitiveness which maybe springs from the idea of a nuclear family, right? And all these competing different parts. You now go over to, parts of the world, the Middle East, like Afghanistan, where tribal identification is so important, networks of families. And you can start to understand the importance of this. Families, competition, resources, scarcity when it occurs. What that does to those dynamics, right? The relationships there. So I just find it, but at the same time, we have burnt everything. We will start again. It is the importance of family. We do have a family here. We need families in order to procreate, to have kids, to start to populate once again. And maybe through the burning of all this material, all these documents, it should be clear to us at this final point in the story that things will be different, right? This will be a gentle, softer father with an already eternally gentle mother, right? That we have in the story. Such a strong relationship. Wanted to make sure I mentioned that again. I love. Well, I jokingly say, but it's serious analysis of the story. This is a great story to read and engage with if you're looking for a strong mother, or should I say husband and wife, mother, father relationships, right? It's so strong. They are on the same page the whole time, engaged on the same mission, watching each other, right? Looking for cues, responding to each other, while the kids are engaged in this game, which seems more competitive and part of the beast of who we are. Whereas the father, mother, and Timothy, honoring God, seem to already be on a different level. It's not about the competition, it's about the cooperation, right? Perhaps more gentle. Think about the father and who he is at this point in his life. And maybe the honesty has helped him get there, the honesty with what was happening on earth. All right. Pretty clear at the end. From the narrative standpoint, Earth would have been, Earth will bring corruption and poison. We use that word here, poison, to any planet that it ends up arriving at. So just a very negative depiction of Earth. You can ask yourself if you feel the same way. Obviously, Earth is still ticking, many different parts of the world, but do you feel like there is this kind of virus that's looming, that humanity has some, just to keep it general, just some negative aspects that it needs to find solutions to, right? Whatever those might be. So Timothy's shivering here at the end. They're looking in the water. They see the whole family. It's like a family portrait here at the end, right? And then they're like, where are the Martians? You've been saying, Dad, this whole time you were going to show us Martians. Where are they? And he basically says, look in the water. Last time we looked in the water, we saw fish. Last time we looked in the water, we saw fish. It was a way of redirecting one of the boys there. Here we're looking in the water. We're not seeing fish, but we are seeing the family. And they're referred to as Martians. And I think Martians, you know, I teach Philip K. Dick literature, and there Mars symbolically is more linked to, I think, Greek and Roman symbolism, where it is war, aggression, victory, conquest, the, you know, virtuous nature of that. You know, there's a lot of things linked in with all of that, but I don't think that's the case here. I think when he says, where are the Martians, even though that could be the case, when you think about conquest, you know, a lot of these things, you know, I guess you could say the epitome of this was Roman civilization, right? Roman conquest, and perhaps some others in the world. Colonial or imperialism, you know, expanding outward by violence, by force, by subjugation, right, of peoples. So you could link it to that. But for me, I think when he says, there's the Martians and we see the family's reflection looking back at us, I think it's more just, you know, a big question mark. This is a new beginning. Here's the Martians looking back at you, and guess what? I'm not going to show you a group of people, right, that you can ooh and awe at, right, and maybe worse, conquer. What I am going to show you is yourselves, right? So this can be what this story is all about, a point of self-reflection, right? So that we can start to reflect on who we are now that we've left an Earth that we've recognized has destroyed itself for, you know, many specific reasons, and we covered those here throughout this lecture. So maybe new beginnings, right? Here are the Martians. Let's take the next step forward, being a new people, right? Maybe along with burning all of these important records of who humans were, they have to essentially drop the name, you know, Earth as well, right? They have to move on. They will be something new. All right. That's going to do it. I don't know if I'll do any more of the Bradbury, the Martian Chronicles stories, but you never know. If there's some other more or less popular pieces, I might try to get my hands on those. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching, and have a beautiful day.